Right, so, The Witcher Time of Contempt, the second book in the Witcher saga, but the fourth book in the Witcher series. It's all very confusing, and I think I'm probably gonna just call this the Witcher saga. I'm just gonna call this the fourth book, because the first two short stories are required. They're needed. If they weren't needed, then I probably wouldn't have read them. But I wouldn't have known not to read them. But also, I didn't know to read them, so I just read them anyway. But I'm just gonna call this I'm just gonna call this book 4, and the next one, Baptism of Fire, which really, Baptism of Fire sounds like it should be the first book. No? Baptism on Fire usually means that's the first thing that you're doing, and it's extremely difficult. But I don't know. But that's not the book that we're talking about today. The book that we're talking about today is Time of Contempt, and this is, I think, the best one so far. I've been waiting with this series for something to really grip me, and I think this had the first moments in it where I was fully I can't put this book down. Reading the other ones, especially with the length of chapters in this book or in this series, I've been struggling to get through big chunks in one sitting. I usually go through a couple pages a sitting, and end wherever a page ends with a sentence end. But with this, especially in the latter half, I just couldn't put it down. I was just fully invested. There's a certain moment which I'll get to later, which was so vividly described that I think it's the best. It's certainly the best moment in the series so far. This book is, every moment from the midpoint is cooler than the last. The last chapter I'll get into later in a spoiler section of the video, which will probably be starting in a minute. The final chapter, there are moments that can be completely removed. I think the final chapter doesn't need to happen. Doesn't need to happen in a way that it happens anyway, because Ciri's been through enough in this series. I've finally gotten to the point where I'm turned around on Ciri's character. I've done a full 180. I think she's the most interesting character in the book, especially for that moment that I mentioned earlier that I'm going to go into more detail later on in the video. This isn't a review. I'm just rambling, but what I've noticed with this series is Geralt is not the main character. Geralt is barely a character in this so far. He may get some really big moments later on, but the character development and the changes and the depth is given to Ciri. Ciri is I guess this is probably due to Ciri being young already anyways, but the big moments of character growth are given to Ciri. That's not saying that other characters don't get that. That's not saying that Geralt doesn't get that. There's a major change after the halfway point of the book where Geralt is kind of questioning everything that he's believed in his entire worldview, and I feel like that's interesting. Not enough time is spent on it for me, and then it goes back into Ciri and her going through basically the last 2 chapters of this book, which is just torture porn, essentially. And that's my biggest complaint with the book. If the book ended on chapter 6 with Ciri being taken by Nilfgaard after her going through the desert with the unicorn, that would be fine for me. After she basically renounces all magic, and essentially the unicorn that she's travelling with gets injured, and she has to heal the unicorn, but there's no strands of magic available to her, so she remembers that magic is in water, earth, air, and it's in fire. So she creates a fire and uses the magic drawn from the fire to heal this unicorn. And in doing so, she's essentially possessed for a moment or two, but it's enough to completely destroy everything, and she sees everyone she's encountered in the last 2 books just dying, burning, being hung, covered in blood, about to be beheaded. And so she renounces all of the power that she has. So where we leave the book with Ciri is where we basically started, but she's not as annoying and she's not a petulant child anymore. She's just a battered, beaten, and bruised individual. But then that last chapter is too much, in my opinion. It's just, she's just nearly starved to death in the desert, and I don't know if it's because Sapkowski just doesn't like Ciri as a character, or he wants Ciri to be at the lowest low point for her to rise in subsequent books. That's probably it, but the low point in this is very, very low, and not something that I felt very comfortable reading. That is to say, and I'll get onto it later, the middle of this book, the first few chapters are just set up. Geralt is still chasing after Rayant after the climax of the last book, and it's Yennefer and Ciri. Basically, Yennefer taking Ciri to the Witches' Conclave, or basically the School of Witches, for her to learn. And Ciri just doesn't want any of it. She runs away back to Geralt. So Geralt and Yennefer have this big meeting after not having a conversation in the last book at all. They don't even share any paid real estate in the last book. But in this, a majority of this book is Geralt and Yennefer together, or at least the middle of the book is Geralt and Yennefer together, and they are back together in this, kind of. I don't know where the end of the book leaves with that. but it all leads into the witches' conclave and this big dinner, which ends in a siege from the elves and Nilfgaard, and big battle ensues. Geralt ends up getting beaten to within an inch of his life, and that siege is the coolest moment in the book, hands down. Followed by Ciri learning, or Ciri being possessed by the fire magic, essentially. Those moments are the best moments in the series so far, in my opinion. I haven't had anything else make me feel like that. Unfortunately, the end of the book leaves a very sour taste in the mouth. And before I go on, I will be discussing essay. I will be discussing the hard R word. So if anything like that is triggering for you, please click off the video. I won't be offended at all. I completely understand that stuff triggers a lot of people. I felt weird reading the last chapter of this. But yeah, just if that stuff does trigger you, you don't need to watch the rest of this video. You can watch any other video that I've done that doesn't discuss that. But now that I've given people an opportunity to leave, if you are okay with stuff like this, then I don't know how to describe what happens in the last chapter. Like I said at the start of the video, it's essentially just torture porn. And a lot of the stuff that happens in the last chapter doesn't need to happen. Ciri being caught by Nilfgaard, it makes sense that they're horrible characters. It makes sense they're the villains. It makes sense that they're like threatening to hard R Ciri, who is 14 at this point. I will put that in there because it you know, so, and she gets beaten. She's like, it's just horrible, and that's before she's taken to this like inn, and where there's this other character that's a prisoner of this other group. That's not important. But this other character is like, if I'm able to escape, or if you help me escape, I can help you get somewhere later on, or I can help you get out as well. I've got a group of friends that can help us, and immediately Ciri's like, I looked into his eyes, and I felt evil from him that was more powerful, that was emanating more powerfully than any of the evil that I've seen before. But she still goes along with him. She still helps him out, assumedly because that's the only way she can get out. And it leads to her being going back with what are described as the rats. Basically, it's just a gang of 6, basically outcasts that essentially play the role of Robin Hood. So we're explicitly told that these are characters that we are supposed to like, or at least supposed to care about. These are characters that we're going to be following for a while. They're characters that Ciri is going to be with for a while. So why then, in the first scenes that we see of these characters all together, Ciri is sleeping in bed, and the rat that was the rat that she helped escape, the one that was being held prisoner, whose name is Kaylee, which is really confusing because I read Kaylee as a female name. Maybe that's just on me, I don't know, but Kaylee ends up getting in bed with Ciri, taking off her clothes and rubbing her body, and thankfully it doesn't get to any further point than that. One of the other rats, called Missile, ends up finding him, threatens him with a knife, just says, "Hey, fuck off. Don't do that." And then she proceeds to get in bed with Ciri, doesn't put Ciri's clothes back on, but just ends up finishing the job. And it's not actively described, thank God, but we do have essentially the one paragraph ends with Ciri fell asleep crying, essentially. There is like some things where like Ciri at first wanted to scream, but then she decided not to, and she fell into this submissive euphoria of where it's this weird implication that she was enjoying being. It's just disgusting. It's really I think there's ways to do assault of that kind in a book like this, and to make it effective and to make it make sense in the grand scheme of the story. I just don't feel like this did. And one of the worst things about this is that these characters are ones that we're meant to like. These are I don't know if they are, but they're being portrayed at the moment as, if not protagonists, anti-heroes. Or anti-protagonists. And I don't know if I want to follow a rapist and a would-be rapist. I just don't know if that's something that I want to follow, and I don't know if I can believe Ciri joining this group out of her own free will. Maybe that is a thing that comes into play later on, but it just feels like Sapkowski wanted to write. It feels like Sapkowski wanted Ciri to be raped at some point in this book and just decided, well, we've got a couple minutes of downtime, let's write the sexual assault scene now. Essentially. And I really don't like that. And it's written so vividly and then almost completely forgotten about as well. It's like that scene, that episode in The Boys, where Huey gets sexually assaulted. Obviously his is I don't want to compare sexual assault because I'm not a dickhead, but what happens to Huey and the boys is visually horrible, but also happens from someone who doesn't know that it's not consensual. I mean, it is done by someone who, but it also isn't. But that scene in that show is just horrible. Anyway, but what happens in this is actively disgusting, and I feel like if the last chapter, if those 2 pages ruin this book for me, without a shadow of a doubt, because it's just unnecessary. It's just completely unnecessary. If we were trying to be led down a path of, oh wait, all of these characters are horrible, or if we were being led down a path of, if we saw any of it coming, pardon the pun, if we saw any of it, with Kaylee, there's a little bit of like foreshadowing with Siri looking into his eyes and seeing pure evil. That makes it, doesn't make it better, but it makes sense to me. But then Missile coming in and finishing the job kind of just comes out of nowhere. Again, pardon the pun, I am not trying to do this at all, but it just doesn't really make sense, and it's going to make reading the next book all the more weirder, because I know that 2 of these characters are horrible. 2 of these characters did the worst thing imaginable in the last book. So, and series 14, it's so weird to think that a writer just decided, oh yeah, let's throw the sexual assault of a minor just at the end of this book, just for the sake of it. And it literally is within the last 15 pages of the book. And I wanted so much for this video to be me gushing about this book, because I really wanted to. Up until the end of chapter 6, even the first half of chapter 7, I was really into this, and then that one scene happened and it just completely took me out of it. I still think that this is the best book in the series. Do I recommend it? If you're reading the whole series, yes. I recommend getting through that bit, because it is just 2 pages, but it's just a warning that is in the book. And that is one fairly major gripe outside of a book that I really enjoyed coming up to that moment. And I recommend the book, but I also warn that is in the book. So if you're of a disposition where that kind of stuff does trigger you in any way, or you just feel uncomfortable reading stuff like that, like I do, then yeah, this one might not be for you, and this series might not be for you, because, a lot of the series' attitude towards women is not great. And that's a big thing that I've said throughout the entirety of every book that I've read. Like, Yennefer is portrayed to be cool. She's portrayed to be this strong, independent, I don't need no man kind of woman, who does care deeply for Geralt. But also there are scenes where her tits are being fondled when she's tied to the wheel of a cart and doesn't, and obviously there's no consent there at all. But then this character that commits obvious sexual assault is portrayed as an altruistic character in the next book. So this kind of trend of the series of people committing sexual assault and not getting any repercussions, or people who commit sexual assault being shown later on to be if not good guys, at least shown to be friends of Geralt, shown to be, you know, they're not, there isn't like, at least there isn't even an attempt to like shove them away. It's like they're still there and they're almost shown to be nice. Like Yarp and Zigrin in The Sword of Destiny actively fondles Yennefer's boobs and threatens to rape her, but in Blood of Elves is shown getting buddy-buddy with Ciri and teaching her swear words and, you know, them getting along. And it's just really weird. And we're even told that Geralt sees Yarp and Zigrin as a friend after he fondled your ex-girlfriend, who is now currently your girlfriend, but at that point was still ex-girlfriend. It's very confusing, but just I don't get it, and it makes me question Sapkowski as a person. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe just because he's willing to forgive that kind of action in literature, maybe doesn't mean that he's willing to forgive that kind of action in real life. But I don't know. And again, this is a book series that was written in the 90s. Attitudes towards women were very different to now. Even back then, even if that does seem like not that long ago, it was quite long ago. But I still feel really weird reading something like that. Again, the rest of the book is great. The moments leading up to that, the siege on the Witch's Coven, is the best scene in the entire series so far. Ciri in the desert with the unicorn is a great chapter and was actually one of the better things in the adaptation as well, because it does actually take from the book pretty much word for word. The final chapter does not need to exist, and we could tell this entire story pretty much the same way without that moment happening. So that has been The Witcher Time of Contempt. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with me, if you enjoyed this book. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this book. And I'm glad that that specific moment didn't make it to the adaptation. But yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Peace.